Oh, sorry. It'll take me a minute to get sit down. So this is a letter of support for the Pugh family to bring the, Kennedy and Patty Pugh's brother, Alvin Pugh, to bring his,
They're having a ceremony for him. They already have his obituary and services at a mass.
I'm gonna fix you right now.
Recording in progress.
Don't take it out. I'm gonna run some digits on you.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
I'm supposed to lift the waters out. I hear you, brother.
Good evening. Good evening. The date is April 19th, and the time is 5:30 p.m., and we are having our regular work session, and we will start with a city update from Mr. Brian McCain, Chief of Staff.
Thank you, ma'am. So the staff update is as follows. Arbor Day with Columbian Elementary School on Thursday, April 18th at 2 p.m. The city of Pueblo has been named a tree city for 44 consecutive years. Students at Columbian Elementary will be awarded prizes for their poster contest. The public is invited to join for the tree planting at Columbian Elementary, located at 1203 Palmer Avenue. Excuse me. Clear your warrant with Pueblo Municipal Court is on Thursday, April 18th from 9 to 2 p.m. Individuals with the warrant will not be arrested. Individuals will have the opportunity to speak with a defense attorney, pay their fines or fees, or set a future court date. Community partners like United Way of Pueblo County and the Pueblo Financial Empowerment Center, the FEC, Catholic Charities, and Pueblo Workforce Center will be there to offer services. And finally, Mayor Graham establishes partnership with the Pueblo Arts Alliance. The Pueblo Arts Alliance is thrilled to extend an open call to all local artists for a prestigious opportunity to have their artwork showcased in the lobby of Mayor Heather Graham's office. The submission guidelines are as follows. Artists are invited to submit artwork in any two-dimensional medium, adhering to the dimensions of the designated space of 4 feet by 6 inches wide and 2 feet by 4 inches high. Submitted artwork must be available for sale. Artwork should be appropriate for all ages, i.e. no nudity, violence, or explicit content, no religious or political artwork, and all submissions must be accompanied by a brief artist statement detailing the inspiration and concept behind their artwork. More information is available for interested artists with Katie Magby, Innovation and Outreach Coordinator, 719-242-6652. The art will hang on the second Friday of each month and rotate on a monthly basis. And we just had our first few go up this last Wednesday, and it was actually by Miss Katie Magby. And that concludes my update.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions from council? Councilor Martinez?
This isn't necessarily for Mr. Bryan. For Councilor Maestri, I'm looking at the schedule here that's upcoming for work sessions, and I don't see the council procedures. I know that we need to talk about that from the retreat, and I would like to talk about that before I go on leave. So if we could have that scheduled,
Yeah,
that would be great.
we'll get that. We'll get it rescheduled.
Thanks.
I'll sit down with Tracy tomorrow, so. Anything else? Okay. Good evening, Mr. Romero.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of City Council. I apologize, I'm not at my laptop. We're at the Capitol. We'll probably be here fairly late. If you can see the background, I'm pretty proud of, if you can see one of the pillars, the marble in the background, all of that marble, as you probably know, if you ever toured the Capitol, is from Beulah, Colorado. And they mined all of that to do for the marble around the Capitol. So really proud of that. So I'm on the first floor around the governor's office just to get a little bit of quiet. There are a lot of committees still meeting. We have 23 days left in the session. We are still following a number of bills for the city. Just to give you a quick update on the bills that impact manufacturing, 165 and 166. They still have not been calendared for Senate Finance. The clock now is our advantage in terms of especially Senate Bill 166, which is very problematic for EVRAZ manufacturing. So the longer it takes for them to get calendared on Senate Finance, that means they still haven't gone to the House for a hearing and all of those things. That's to our advantage, and we still feel pretty confident that we have enough votes to kill Senate Bill 165. We're here at the Capitol this evening for House Bill 1330. This was the air permitting bill that also a number of manufacturers in Pueblo were very concerned about, but the bill was amended only to oil and gas. We continue to follow it for the city only because of the huge fiscal impact it has on CDPHE. And the fiscal note it runs as high, depending on the analyst, it would take a significant number of FTE to implement 1330. That would drive costs and could impact the number of permits that are done for oil and gas, and that could also impact the taxes that oil and gas companies do for severance tax. So we're monitoring that bill. It'll probably go late this evening, but that particular bill we continue to follow but only as it relates to oil and gas. The other bill that we're following still hasn't gotten out of House Bill 1338 is still in House Appropriations. Again, it still has to go to the Senate with 23 days left. So that we expect a really a packed 23 days and a lot of bills going down to the wire in terms of whether or not they're going to actually pass. I wanted to bring up a bill, and I'm going to have members of my team talk to you about it. We got an email from Scott Hobson regarding from planning and the community development regarding a tax credit bill that would really be helpful to some of the older buildings in Pueblo that they can get a tax credit from. So I'm going to turn the rest of the presentation over to my team to talk to you about that bill and some of the other bills we're following. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. A few updates for members of council and the mayor. So one of the major pieces of gun legislation, the bill banning the sale of assault weapons, passed the House this weekend, along with House Bill 24-1152, accessory dwelling units. So both of these bills will now cross over and move to the Senate. An update on the Commission on Property Tax. This commission met this past Friday, where they heard an update on ballot initiatives and discussed a brief overview of the proposed property tax bill that encompasses all of the recommendations that were brought forward by the commission. And the plan is to include all of these elements into one large bill with more details to come in about a week once the sponsor has released a draft. We also sent a detailed report out on this today. So some of the elements that will be included in the bill, Section 1 will have taxpayer support mechanisms. So they want to create an option for owners to pay 12 times a year the same benefit that mortgage holders have when they are still paying off their home, as well as a reduction of the deferral threshold to 0%, which is currently at 4%. And then in Section 2, they want to do an assessment rate separation. So they would split local and school assessment rates into separate categories, and they would do this in statute. So the idea behind this is to separate property tax assessment rates for schools and other local services. It'll enhance the funding flexibility for education and stabilize revenue for essential local government functions by implementing these dual assessment rates. And then in Section 3, there's the property tax relief mechanisms. And so they want to extend and doing a little enhancement on the property tax relief that they provided the last couple sessions. and then an introduction of a value reduction based on a percentage of a threshold value. This is similar to the senior homestead exemption. And then lastly, they want to look at differentiating between primary and non-primary residences in their property tax calculations. And then as Gil mentioned, there's a new bill we would like to get the city's feedback on. This bill was highlighted by a staff member from your planning department, and is a bill that the city might consider supporting due to the number of historic buildings in Pueblo. And so that bill is House Bill 24-1314, modification, tax credit preservation, historic structures. And so this bill is currently sitting in Appropriations Committee. And so what it does is it updates this tax credit by reducing the qualifying age of the property from 50 to 30 years. It extends the credit claim period to 2036. And it increases the maximum tax credit for residential structures from $50,000 to $100,000. And it also makes the credit refundable starting in 2027. For commercial structures, it extends credit reservation through 2032. The bill also creates a new dedicated pool of tax credits specifically aimed at encouraging the rehabilitation of commercial historic structures to include residential units with the focus on affordable housing. So to qualify for this portion of the tax credit, you would have to convert at least 50% of the commercial structures total square footage into new housing units intended for rent to encourage the adaptive reuse of historic commercial buildings. So really what this bill does is it really tries to make the tax credit more accessible and supportive of residential renovations and affordable housing. With that, I will turn it back over to members of council if you have any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Romero? Alec, I have a question. You said that the accessory dwellings unit made it through the through first reading? Or
Yes,
was
Madam
approved?
Chair. That bill has cleared the House.
Okay.
So it will now move on to the Senate, and it'll be the same process over in the Senate.
Did they remove the clause for that, takes away the local control? Or is that still in there?
Our interpretation of the bill is it's still in there. It's somewhat flexible in terms of how it encourages the development of ADUs, but it would still usurp that local control to a degree.
And then also, does it jeopardize funding for affordable housing to the cities if they don't participate in, say, we chose not to do that here in Pueblo? Does it take away any subsidies or opportunities, grant opportunities for affordable housing if we chose not to participate in that?
Madam Chair, let me follow up with that for you. And as far as I know, this is a requirement under the bill, so it would be a mandate. But in terms of the funding, let me double check that for you, and I'll get an answer back to you.
Yeah, because I see, like in the metropolitan cities and so forth, when they're putting in an accessory dwelling unit on, say, a single-family lot, and they're adding that accessory dwelling unit, the cost of these units, I just managed a conversion of a single-car garage in Springs here a couple years back. It was base grade, no kitchen, a bathroom, and a living space, and it was like $65,000. So rent on something like that in Springs is way different than, saying that that's affordable here in Pueblo. When you're renting an accessory dwelling unit that's costing you $100,000 in Denver, the rent on that is affordable for Denver, but it's really not affordable for here. And for us to lose any kind of funding opportunities or grant opportunities for affordable housing just doesn't make sense for Pueblo. That's all I was thinking about with that particular bill. Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think you're absolutely correct, Madam Chair, in terms of the cost of these. I think what this bill is trying to do is hopefully streamline the development of some of these ADUs. Of course, that'll take time, but hopefully drive down costs. But this bill does have a grant program attached to it, and I will definitely follow up with you on the details of this bill.
Okay, great. Anyone else? Yes.
So for the House Bill 24-1314, for the tax credit, I'd like to ask, I guess, Gil or Alec, do you prefer this being a letter by us or a resolution?
I think it would carry more weight if you did a resolution. We have so many historic buildings. I just think this is one that we would, and the fiscal impact of this bill for 24-25 and 25-26, I think it really has a shot at getting out of appropriations and onto the Senate. So, but we only have 23 days left. So whichever is, in terms of timing is easier for the city, just so that we can get on record and then also start to lobby the bill.
Great. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I really appreciate staff flagging it for you and us to look at. I mean, I hear all the time from people of like, oh, it'd be really cool if we could turn this building into, whatever, and all of those buildings are primarily like on Union and Main and like in the downtown corridor that are really expensive and really old. So I'd like to give direction to staff, Mr. Gifford, if we can write a resolution, and if that's going to be too time intensive, if we could put together a letter.
A resolution, I don't believe would come before council for till May. So I think a letter for timeliness, we might want to get a letter in. I can draft a resolution and get it on the agenda. And if it's still in committee at that time, the resolution will be there as well. Is there, I would defer to anyone else if there's a way to get a resolution on at the next meeting, or if that's even possible.
So I'm not sure that was going to be my question. It's what the timing is for this as far as getting it in front of the legislators, because I could ask the city clerk if we could get it on for the 22nd, but my guess is the answer would be no, that it wouldn't come on to council until the May 6th. I think it's the May 6th meeting. So I don't know if that would still be helpful. And like Harley said, we could always do a letter initially, follow it up with a resolution, and then if that's still appropriate, send it up at that time.
No, I think the letter would really be helpful if you down the road. I mean, I think the letter would really be helpful for us to lobby it in the House and pass the letter out and then work and lobby it in the Senate. I mean, with 23 days left, I think people recognize that, that some of the, especially for governmental entities, these things take time. But for this particular bill, if you'd like to go on record, I think a letter is sufficient.
Okay, we'll get that letter started then.
Thank you so much.
My other question was on the ADUs. Is there another opportunity where the city, if council wanted to, could submit something further in opposition to that bill? Is there something that they should be doing to voice further opinion on that?
Was that question directed at me from the city attorney?
Yeah, either you, Gil, or Alec, whoever can answer that. I don't know if there's another opportunity, if there's something further council wants to do in opposition. I believe we've already done a resolution.
Okay. Well, I think, yeah, let us get some further information on the two questions that Madam Chair asked. I think are really good ones in terms of the penalties for affordable housing and how that impacts the grant program. We'll get you an answer to those, and then based upon those answers, then let us know, what position the city would want to take. Because this bill, as I said, it'll get a lot more debate, further hearings in the Senate. So just let us know once we get you that information.
And just to flag it, it hasn't been scheduled in the Senate yet, so we should have at least a few days. before it gets scheduled.
Okay, any other questions from council? All right, if that's all you have this evening, gentlemen, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And all your
Thank you.
efforts up there representing Pueblo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so next on our list tonight is going to be Mr. Andrew Hayes, for Public Works Director, regarding the Mike Hanratty Memorial Highway Project.
Madam Chair, members of council, it gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce Chris Allen from the Beulah Historical Society. They are here to make a request and present some information about PFC Mike Hanratty, who is a Marine who died in Vietnam. But I'll turn it over here to Chris and let her take it away.
Good evening. I'm part of the Beulah Historical Society, and over a year ago, we took on the project of getting Highway 78, or a segment of it, named in honor of Mike Hanratty, who still has family in the Beulah area. In fact, there's several here with us this evening. Bessie is Mike's sister, and then he has 2 cousins there as well, and friends. So my request, our request, Beulah Historical Society, is that the city and county could work together to make and install the signs to place on Highway 78 that memorialize Mike Hanratty. We haven't really established exactly what the wording is, but in his honor. And the state of Colorado, or the Senate, on Thursday, we were really honored. The resolution was read by both Senator Cleve Simpson and Nick Hendrickson, and the resolution was passed unanimously. Not only that, but all of the senators became co-sponsors of the bill. And it was actually a pretty emotional event in the Capitol with the beautiful Beulah red marble right there, too. And so the resolution now has been passed. I haven't gotten a copy of it yet, but I'll get it soon and pass it on. And so what we're asking then is that at this point, instead of CDOT doing the signs and putting them in place, that the city and county of Pueblo work together to do that. And just some background too, and we've had plenty of flyers, so here's more information about Mike himself. In 1967, he was a Marine, and he was part of a helicopter crew. And the helicopter went down. There was quite a crash, and to this day, Mike is considered missing in action. There were attempts to get to the crash site, and it was difficult. In fact, one of the units got ambushed as they were trying to get to the crash site to see if they could rescue anybody, and 2 of the people in that unit died too. So another unit got a little bit closer, but was not able to actually get to the crash site. And so at that point, Mike, it was missing in action. There's a lot of backstory to exactly how the family was notified of all this. There's more detail and information about that on the flyer. But to this day, he remains missing in action. And it is our wish to memorialize him with this naming a segment of Highway 78 in his honor, with signs facing west, and then as you come out of Beulah, a sign facing east. The Andrew Hayes here has provided a lot of great information and guidance in helping us work on this project and prepared slides that you can get an idea of what this will look like. And I did check with CDOT, and it's fine with them if Pueblo handles this part of the work. And then at a later date, we plan on having a dedication event, which would be for the signs and in honor of Mike, and also for his family and other veterans. So. Yep.
So Chris approached us several weeks ago to kind of initiate the conversation about how this might go and what kind of process might happen in order to get the signs installed. I think initially, Chris and the group had intended to come to City Council to ask for some funds to raise money for having CDOT pay for and do the installation themselves. Ultimately, Mike is a local area resident and has strong ties to the community. His family is still here. We felt like this is something that we could support in-house by providing the signage and the hardware necessary on the city's dime. And the county Public Works Department has also agreed that they would be able to take those materials and install the signs. The particular segment in question is somewhere outside of the city limits, just outside of Hog Farm Road was going to be the eastern terminus of the designation, and then the western terminus would be somewhere around Siloam Road down towards Beulah. It's about a 14.1 mile section. CDOT has, I guess, raised a concern that maybe the segment needs to be just a little bit smaller, so this is as proposed to CDOT, but the final designation of which segment would be named for Mike would be determined here by CDOT and approved by them. Ultimately, again, a lot of this coordination has been eased somewhat by our recent work with CDOT on the renaming of the MLK bypass. So the coordination of approval of signage and the process for getting here has kind of been worked out for us just in advance of Chris's group's request here. Ultimately, we're probably talking less than $2,500 of material. I think it might even be less than that in terms of material and labor to fabricate the signs. Again, we would be handing that material over to the county who would be doing the installation is the plan. So there would be obviously joint public support for the project through this in lieu of City Council or Pueblo County necessarily providing funds directly to the project. We did put a note here on the bottom that June 11th is the 57th anniversary of his death. And, a target date for having these signs up, installed, and unveiled. This is something that's possible, again, with council's approval. So this is just one more good reason to get it done and promptly. Looking to the west, this is an area just out beyond Hog Farm Road, which is the end of city limits. This is a representation of what those signs might look like. Essentially, the sign reads PFC Thomas Michael Mike Hanratty USMC Memorial Highway. And so CDOT, again, will approve this layout formally and provide the minimum requirements for the sign installation that the city and county would have to abide by. Looking to the west, this is, again, just east of Siloam Road, looking to the east. And so we've got milepost markers here for CDOT so they can see where this would be. Again, getting the locations and the layouts approved. You've got the flyer in front of you, but there is some more information available through the Beulah Historical Society's website. And so, again, with council's approval, we intend to bring a resolution forward next meeting, just authorizing, it's a resolution of support for the project and authorizing the Public Works Department to work collaboratively with the county to see that the signs are installed. So that concludes our presentation, and we'll take any questions you have.
Any questions from council? Councilor Flores?
I don't have any questions. You certainly have my support. I was looking at the date. It's really scary because that was the exact date I was drafted during Vietnam, and I had to report to basic training in September. But the date's kind of embedded in my head. But you certainly have my support.
When in the Senate, when Senator Hinrichsen spoke very thoughtful remarks about how the war in Vietnam still is with us in ways, and for some people more than others. So.
Was there any hope during the, after the war that someone can still find remnants of the crash?
What I've learned, and part of this is through a gentleman named Ray Sullivan, who was part of the first group that went in to try to rescue or recover what they could, is that the crash was a fully loaded helicopter. There's a certain name for that kind, and it basically left nothing. So.
Any, Councilor Hernandez?
Madam Chair, thank you. Mr. Hayes, on the material and labor costs at $2,500, how do you go about that far as, labor is a sunk cost using an accounting terminology, so you mentioned on staff time. So to give me a perspective of how that's done, do you actually keep track of the time? Certainly the materials, you have signage materials, but the printing has to be done on it. How's that done?
Sure. So the city does have an operating budget that includes fabrication, installation of signage. This is similar to the request that I'd made several weeks back regarding the Medal of Honor signage that is starting to make its way up. So out of that, we're talking about the fabrication of 2 signs, probably somewhere in the vicinity of 3 by 6 feet. If they're much larger than that, we have to go out to contract for them, but the sign of this size is something that we should be able to manufacture in-house. We're probably talking in prep, I would guess 3 to 6 man-hours of time between the actual fabrication of the sign, preparation of the sign, and I'm gonna butcher it. It's not just putting stickers on the sign, but there's a vinyl backing, reflective material that gets put on, of course, and then the actual installation and preparation of the hardware that we would then give to the county for the installation. So yes, and I mean, for all intents and purposes, we do track the time that our employees are working on different projects.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Did you have something? No. Mr. Hayes, is this coming out of your existing budget then? It's not coming out of reserves?
Correct. This is just, we're asking for this to come out of the existing operating budget for the Public Works Department.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Anything else?
I have something.
Councilor Latino?
In terms of this, obviously it's a tribute to a young man who sacrificed his life for the freedom of this country. Have you talked to the county yet about this? Because this is in the county. This isn't in the city, as I understand it, right?
That's correct. So this area is in the county. Again, Mike had community ties here. He attended school at Southern Colorado State College at the time, and was a student at County High School. So he spent much of his younger years here, growing up in and around the city.
Is that what you're saying? He went to County High?
Went to County High, lived in Beulah, and then attended SCSC before he went to Vietnam.
Okay. Again, I don't see this. I see this as a wonderful thing to do, a tribute to this young man, obviously. But I think the county is the one that needs to be really involved in this. I really do.
And they are. So
They're going to absorb the cost of this?
No, to your question, they're going to contribute to the project in the form of labor and installation of the signage. So we're just going to fabricate the signs and transfer that material to them to install. It's also out in the county, and CDOT will require them to maintain that. So
the money will be coming from the city then?
Correct, for the upfront cost for the installation. The county also will support through their general fund the Public
So
Works
it'll be a
Department making the
collaboration
installation.
between the city and the county?
Yes, sir. So it's a split effort showing joint public support, rather than, again, having a specific request for funds directly from council to support this.
Okay.
This was a way that we felt we could publicly support this.
All right, thank you.
All righty then. Oh,
I wanted to clarify too, Highway 78 partially goes through Pueblo. And then at the county line, it extends. So this highway, I live in Ventana, so I'm right next to the highway. And that's within this, partially that highway, even though it's a state highway, runs through Pueblo and Pueblo County.
That's
I just
correct.
wanted to clarify that.
The portion that was designated on that map is outside city limits. That is true. But again, with PFC Hanratty's ties to the community, it's not inappropriate for the city to offer some support. And again, a resolution of support would be coming forward next week for your consideration.
I'd just like to add that Mike Hanratty did 2 years at SCSE majoring in architecture, and then he joined to be part of the Marine Corps and served proudly several missions. I don't know the exact number, but yes, he spent 2 years up at SCSE.
We're going to go ahead and give direction to move that into a resolution. Mr. Gifford, and are we all in agreement that we're going to move it forward? Okay.
I have another question.
Okay, you can go ahead and ask the question.
Thank you. Being somewhat familiar with this kind of dedication and memorial, I'm thinking about the situation that occurred at Columbine several years ago. I was involved in that, and I'm talking about Dave Sanders, who was the teacher coach who was killed, who coached for me. And they did not change the name of C-470, but they put a memorial there. And so, but we're going to change the name of the street, of this road, right?
That's a good question. So there's unlike our renaming of the highway, of Highway 50 bypass to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. bypass, this is simply a supplementary designation, a memorial designation on the highway. It does not change any addresses. It doesn't change the name or number of the highway or anything like that. This is just simply honoring PFC Hanratty's service and sacrifice at the ends of each of the designated
Thank you. I
segments.
appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All righty, well, thank you for your time, and we're putting it into a resolution to move it forward. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And congratulations. Thank you for all your efforts. All righty, so Mr. Hayes is still up on the podium. And our next topic is the abatement of dangerous buildings.
Madam Chair, members of council.
Excuse me, can I interrupt, Ms.
Yes.
Chairman? We're having technical thing. Could we take a 10-minute break where they reset the system? It stopped recording, and by open records, we have to have a recording going.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Let's do a 10-minute break. We'll return at 6:17.
This is just letting the Department of Veterans Affairs know that we're for.
Yes. You don't want to spend anything.
Okay.
It's just a letter of support.
Yeah, that's it, okay, that's what I thought.
Little surprises, okay? Just remember that.
You never know.
Keep that back here. I'm part of your, you said you're a Pulitzer Prize. That's exactly right.
Okay, so what they're asking me to do is, you know, the veteran that was buried by the military in Newark, New Jersey.
Recording in progress.
Family member here, and without the family knowing, they went ahead and buried him over there. This is a letter of support, wanting to bring his body back. Yeah, there you go. It's not.
So what am I supposed to do? Sign it?
Yeah, it's gonna be, after you read whatever it is, then, okay.
Just to let you know, the Zoom account, for some reason, it's only allowing 45-minute increments.
Oh,
But it's ready.
today?
They got it.
Oh, okay. Well, Mr. Latino ran to the restroom. So, yeah. Vince, go tell Mr. Latino we fixed it. Looks like we're ready to resume. And so we're back with Mr. Hayes, and we are going to be discussing the abatement of dangerous buildings.
Madam Chair, members of council, good evening again. With turnover on council and with new staff in the room as well, it is probably appropriate that we have a few minutes just to talk about our dangerous buildings abatement program. Quick refresher on how the process works, how those projects do come to us. So I'm going to take a few minutes here with you and talk about kind of the interactions we have with other entities as well. Maybe. There we go. So we're going to go over, again, kind of our authority, the laws, the rules surrounding the projects that come to us, how the process actually works, all the various stakeholders involved, talk a little bit about the budget and what our current demolition list looks like, and then kind of the outlook going forward. The project or this program is really set up not as a way to, I guess, target or remove people's rights with respect to their property. However, there are a lot of blighted properties in the community that need to be cleaned up and abated. This is a tool that we have established in our code for handling dangerous buildings when they are inspected and determined to be as such, and when notices and orders are filed and the buildings are condemned. Ultimately, in those cases, when a building is condemned, typically it is still responsible for a property owner to take care of. But if a property owner is not responsive or unable to handle the abatement, those cases can be referred to the city for further action. It is basically trying to set up, a process where dangerous buildings, those that endanger health, life, limb, morals, welfare of the general public, we have a tool at least to either repair, abate, or demolish the nuisance. So through this process, there's been some recent conversation about wanting to speed this process up, and I think that's desirable on everybody's part. However, part of our process is specifically protecting the rights of the property owner who own that property that's there. So there is a due process built into our abatement procedures. So essentially, again, when a building is determined to be a nuisance or is rather a dangerous building, once that condemnation happens, there is a period of time that homeowner or property owner has to respond to that notice and order. Typically, it's 90 days. There's an appeal process. There are hearings at regional that take place in there. And then following that, a case could be referred to the city. And there are still further actions that council can take if there are mitigating circumstances to help protect the rights of the property owner if needed. So we'll talk about those just a little bit further here. So our program authority essentially comes from the 1997 Uniform Code for the Abatement of Dangerous Buildings. There is some amendments to that Uniform Code laid out in Section 4, or Title 4, Section 13 of the code. But ultimately, this process is what is followed to not only identify the dangerous buildings, but to go through the condemnation process and also to assess liens against the properties or against the property owners afterwards, and to collect or make those liens whole for the city. So two other laws that kick into play quite a bit, primarily Regulation 8 up there. You see the asbestos abatement note. This is, Reg 8 is the administrative code that deals with asbestos pollution specifically, but it certainly talks about how we have to handle asbestos-containing materials that are in the buildings that we demolish. So after a building is determined to be a dangerous building, there's environmental testing, there's also historical assessments and other procedures that we have to go through to do due diligence depending on the fund source that's funding that particular demolition project. Reg 8 applies in every case. So if there is asbestos-containing material, we have to abate that asbestos-containing material in accordance with those rules. This can vary from anything from small level, bagging material within a building, all the way up to what we would refer to, kind of like what we did for the Albany, an open air abatement. Those kinds of procedures are much, much more expensive. They require a lot more monitoring. And so we try to get these buildings abated and demolished without having to go through these open air abatements if possible. That's when the cost tends to go way up. Anytime we're using federal funds, the National Historic Preservation Act and frankly NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act, require us to do other assessments as well. And so we'd be working with the State Historic Preservation Office or other entities that might deal with the specific interests related to that property. And so there's a significant due diligence period that comes in when federal funds are used. And typically the federal fund source that we would use would be CDBG funds. So most of our demolitions are funded either from our CDBG funds, where there's funds set aside each year for that purpose, or have been historically. And there's also some capital improvement money. And so the city also has its own general fund money that we put into projects for that. We've typically tried to spend down the CDBG pot just because most of the homes that are being demolished happen to be in qualified census tracts. Spending that money down also, there's an ongoing look at the funds and the balance in that account. And so for the housing and for now the planning department, it's important to make sure those balances are spent down each year before the end of December. So this is a bit of an eye chart, and I will send you these separately, but there's two flow charts here I've got. This is the one from regional that is going to be really tough to read. But ultimately, the demolition process, notification starts with a complaint of some kind, either an external complaint or an inspection is started by fire chief, building official, one of a few folks in the city designated to be able to initiate that process. Ultimately, those cases are referred to regional. Regional is the authority that ultimately does the condemnation inspection. They're the ones that do the inspection and work their way toward condemnation if that's necessary. When they do the condemnation, they file a notice and order, and the homeowner has time to respond to that notice and order, again, typically 90 days. At the end of that 90-day period, if the homeowner is not responsive or the property owner is not responsive, that's when a case might be referred to the city for further action. So this little eye chart, again, represents the regional part of the process. I'll flip over to the next one here. This is kind of where the city comes in. When these cases are referred to us, we get a letter, we get a notice and order that has been recorded, we get a copy of an inspection report, and ultimately a note saying this is handed over to the city under the Uniform Code of for Dangerous Buildings for further action. So at that point, we begin an environmental assessment, a historical assessment, and we start working our way through the pre-demolition homework that needs to be done in order to get the building ready. Sometimes that could be significant. Again, where we talked about the Albany, that particular project involved a significant design up front of significant variance that was required. So applying to CDPHE for those variances takes some time. Normally, it's a 3 to 4 month process. In the case of the Albany building, it was more like 8 or 9 months to get that variance. So it can take some time to do. All of this comes, again, after the Notice and order has been filed. Regional has had hearings. There's appeals. And so it could be months from the time that the notice and order process has started or the inspection has started to the time that this case is even referred to the city. I would say a minimum typically of 6 months, but it could be much longer, depending on the circumstances. Once we've got it, there's a fairly straightforward process. We get them, we start these other assessments, and we move forward with getting a contract ready to go, if there are funds available. In this case, lately there have been. So we've had CDBG money set aside for projects that are in the census, qualified census tract areas. And we do have some funds left over that were represent a savings that we saw in the Albany building. We had initially estimated that that demolition was going to cost around $1.2 million. The demolition contract was awarded at about $665,000. There were other costs, incidental costs, including the environmental monitoring and other things. So we spent probably somewhere close to $800,000, $850,000 for that demolition, but it was lower than what we thought. So there are some cost savings that we had, and those funds were set aside still in the in an account called CIA M23 that is a demolition of a dangerous building. So there's some funds that are left in there. Ultimately, once the demolition is completed, we can go back and assess that property. So I'll come to council every once in a while with a report of demolition that'll be completed. In order to begin an assessment, I have to go through that process with you, but it gives also the homeowner or property owner an opportunity to come to you and present any mitigating circumstances that they may have, make a case as to why maybe they should not have the assessment made against their property or against them. But ultimately, a hearing will be scheduled and an ordinance will pass, or ordinance will be presented for consideration that will assess that lien or assessment against their property. So I mentioned stakeholders. There's quite a few. So within that purple cloud there, you can kind of see within the city departments that are involved. There's everybody from public works, code enforcement, planning, housing, finance, legal, purchasing. But property owners still have a stake in this. One thing that is maybe not so intuitive is that the building doesn't, or the city doesn't take over ownership of the property when it's demolished. When we assess that lien, the property owner still owns that property, but the city has an ownership interest in, or a lien interest against it. That's something that I guess people assume sometimes that maybe the city forecloses on that and the city becomes the owner. That is not the case necessarily. Sometimes property owners work with us and they'll transfer the deed of those properties over to us without an assessment or without having to finish this assessment process. Frequently, though, we don't have cooperative property owners. They're either not in the picture or not actively participating in that process. And so we will go through an assessment process, and those assessments will be filed after a hearing with you. As I mentioned, state and federal agencies are involved. CDPHE typically is the one that mostly gives us our environmental clearances. The State Historic Preservation Office also gets involved in terms of historic assessments that may need to be done. Regional is obviously involved on that front end, and they also ultimately clear the condemnation once the demolition work is done. And obviously, we have contractors involved through our purchasing department. We work to acquire those services and oversee the demolition work when it's there. And finally, the Pueblo County Assessor is involved in terms of us recording that the condemnation is lifted, notices that the condemnation is being lifted, and clearing the condemnation from the property record. So currently at this moment, we have approximately 20 properties that are on the list in some stage of demolition or condemnation. Some of these have been cleared but have not been officially lifted. The condemnations haven't been lifted yet, so they're still on our list until we get them completely closed out. But several of these are addresses that may have come up before. So 623 East 2nd Street, for instance, is one that is been brought up across the street from an urban renewal project that's going on. So this is a property that is burned. The property has been referred to us, and so there were questions about whether we are able to either have to do an open air abatement or if we can do something with a process they refer to as tenting. And so in this case, I think we've got a process where we're going to be able to shorten that time frame down and get this property tented to do the abatement. So just for awareness, I guess, typical abatement costs for a property that is not requiring open-air abatement have varied anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000, $70,000. 50 is kind of a good average to say. Many of these, though, have exceeded $100,000 in cost, particularly when we start talking about significant asbestos abatement requirements. The 20 properties that are in there, we're probably talking close to $2 million to demolish, $1.5 to $2 million essentially. Many of these that are on this list, some of them have been there for some time, and many have been deferred because they're so expensive that they haven't gotten the priority that, say, the Albany or a more dangerous structure has generated. This is, 20 properties is certainly not the number of blighted properties around the city. And so for this program to continue, it's going to require some ongoing funding. Right this moment, there's approximately $1 million, 1.2, I believe, is the total number in the CI accounts, so our city general fund money towards demolition. And then we have about $95,000 right now left in CDBG accounts that are sitting in demo accounts. So that was a lot of information, but that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Any questions from council? Councilor Gomez.
Yeah, this whole process just drives me nuts. We have a property at, I see it on our list now, is 1132 Cypress. It's been on a demolition list for 7 years. Okay, and I don't understand why the process is taking that long. And then you have, I called several times for information about these properties, and I called the fire department also in reference to other properties that are burnt down. Behind the clamshell, there's another property there. It's dangerous. And the guy that purchased that business is just, he's gone crazy. He wants to know, why is it taking so long for them to address a property in a commercial area that's impacting his commercial space? How long will that be on that demolition? I'm not expecting an answer now, but it's taking way too long for this stuff to be taken care of. And when you use the term, when things are deferred because they get too expensive, what does that mean? I mean, do we ever get to it? Is that what happens with these properties that are not being taken care of?
So there have been maybe varying policy approaches, I think, on this front. So if we want to invest this money, this is not a revenue generating venture by any means. Mm-hmm. So this is something that if the city is going to do, it's going to require the outlay of funds to do this work. For instance, when we demolish the Albany and we spend $800,000, ultimately, if the city takes ownership of that property and passes that on to do something, there is no way we're going to recover the cost of what we spent on that. So this is not something that is sustainable to do in big form unless there are funds laid out for that purpose. As I mentioned, there's about $1.2 million right now that's set aside across several accounts, but that could be used for the demolition of these dangerous buildings. Recently, Councilor Latino and my staff and I went out to look through the east side, and we pointed out several properties, and there's a number that are not on that list yet. Several have been referred to regional. They're starting their inspections, they're starting the condemnations, but until I get them referred, they won't be added to our list. So there are dozens of properties across the city that could potentially be eligible for abatement of some kind. And when we say abatement, it doesn't necessarily mean demolition. It could be repair. But ultimately, if there's a nuisance condition, these funds could be used to make the repairs, to make the site more pleasant, and get the building back up to livable standards so that it can be put back to highest and best use. With respect to 1132 Cypress, I'll have to look specifically at that case. I don't know the specifics on that one, but I will find that information for you.
At my town hall, we had looking for some solutions to get this done quicker. And Urban Renewal had said that they could come up with a process where this could get done a lot faster than going through the city. And all I'm concerned about is in my area in District 4, there's a lot of these problems there, for everything from abatements to demolition to fire build, and the investment possibilities for them, it's not there. And I'm really concerned that we're not getting anything done, and is there a quicker way to do this? I know insurance is another big issue for you guys. How do we move this along so we're not waiting 7 years, 6 years, whatever? We've got to come up with something quicker. Can you work with urban renewal? Can we do the things that maybe they're suggesting?
So there are two ways I think that we can maybe shorten the fuse just a little bit. One of those is making sure that we are working with regional to notify them immediately when there's a fire or some kind of building incident that require them to initiate a condemnation inspection. So I would say that sometimes there are cases, say the Mandarin recently burned, right? That facility was handled very quickly, but the property owner jumped right on it and got that building taken down. So if you haven't been by on 29th Street, that's already gone. But that property owner, it was a different scenario completely than, say, the Albany. The prompt notification to regional to begin those inspections is one way. I don't believe that urban renewal has any special tools that will get them around the due process requirements. So to the extent that we have a cooperative property owner that is willing to convey the property to the city, that's fine. It may not be in the city's best interest to take ownership of properties or urban renewal even. So I think on a case-by-case basis, for instance, this owner at 623 2nd Street, if they're willing to sign that property over to the city, that might be a way for us to bypass some of the requirements with respect to the due process portion of that notice and order.
Who brings that proposition to them? Is that something you guys would do? Is it something urban renewal would do? How does that work? So
regional typically is the one that's having to make contact with the property owner initially. And so when they do that, they notify them that there's an unsafe condition on the property and the property owner has 90 days to respond. Ultimately, if they do respond, there are tools that regional will let them certainly use their own money to restore their property. If it makes it all the way to us, even then, people do approach us after that 90-day period has expired. I've got one case right now where we have a property agreement or a project agreement in place with a property owner over on 20th Street who is using her own funds to bring her property back up to standard. This is advantageous for a number of reasons, but primarily we're not spending public money to take care of somebody's private mess. So that's always desirable, but we don't. I would say that's the exception, not the rule. Not everybody comes out ready to spend money to restore their property. The deprivation of rights with respect to property ownership is a problem, and I don't think urban renewal has any tricks that I don't have available to them to speed that process up. Like I say, if we've got a cooperative property owner, there are certainly ways that we can expedite that portion if they're willing to convey the property to the city. But we also need to make sure it's something that we want to accept. There may be messes that we don't, that wouldn't be in the public interest.
Is there a reasonable deadline date? I mean, you say 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years? At what point do you say enough?
Yeah.
Can you give me an idea what that is? I know this is hard. I'm not trying to pick on you guys.
You're
I'm just saying, for me, having this, and this is all I hear, this particular property, I said it's been on for 7 years. At what point do we say, let's cap it at 4 years, whatever, and if it's not, it's coming down, one way or the other? I don't understand why we can't do that.
Sure. And within 7 years, there should have been some kind of notification to the property owner, a condemnation notice and order filed, and then funds applied if we're ready to go knock that down or abate it in some other way. Again, if we're talking about Cypress, I'll go look at that particular one, the one behind the clamshell. I'm not sure that address, but we can take a look at that as well.
That's 1310 Route Avenue. I just visited it yesterday, and I took pictures. But there's a real danger there with children going in and out of that facility. And then the commercial, you can see it right off of Northern as you're going by. And it's sad. This guy in the clamshell, he has to put up with broken windows in his front door, and then he comes out. That wasn't good enough. Then the house burns down behind him. I mean, these guys, they're at their wits' end.
And
I don't blame them.
We frequently talk about these in the context of building fires that create these dangerous conditions. It's not always fires. We have one on Berkeley and Mesa, or just south of Berkeley and Mesa, that a bus hit. And so those kinds of conditions also. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why a building might make it on this list. It might just be deterioration, decay, neglect. It could be a number of reasons that generate this, or generate these properties to be considered for referral to regional. But it shouldn't take us 7 years to get these done, bottom line.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Counselor Aliff?
So when we look at the demolition list, that's not an exhaustive list of the properties. And why don't we see that?
Correct. So, well, the exhaustive list is coming from a number of different sources. Ultimately, this is the list of buildings that have been referred to us from regional. As I mentioned, we started on the east side and started looking for, going out and inspecting for dangerous buildings out there. I think we need to do the same thing in District 4. Councilor Gomez has expressed a lot of concern about blighted properties in his district, and there are certainly other areas of town where it's required as well. But putting those lists together certainly helps us quantify our problem, much like when I come to you with the roads package. We have to put the whole package together to let you know exactly how much we're talking about here. And then we can prioritize our efforts toward getting those cleaned up. I will say that we're in the process right now of putting together applications also for some EPA grants. One of the asks in there is funds for demolition of blighted properties. That is a package we're putting together right now, so that is certainly not a guarantee, and it's something that would probably not come until next year or so. In the meantime, there are some funds available. Again, we've got about $1 million that might do 10 dangerous, buildings that might require an open air abatement. It would probably be half of our list here. So just, if this is a priority for council, this is something that we can execute. We can make sure we've got the demolition contractors on standby. We can make sure we've got the asbestos and environmental contractors on standby. But it's, like I say, it's going to be a resource-intensive exercise to do.
Well, I asked the question because we used to get a list that was a page or two long that literally listed every single property in the city of Pueblo that was either abandoned, burned out, for whatever reason. And we received that list, and we had a dollar amount next to it, and it gave council just like you just said, a complete picture of what reality is. Because reality is not 20 houses that are on the demolition list. Reality is there's hundreds of houses out there, properties out there that need to be dealt with. You know, I would mention to city council, this is a budget process, and when you get to the CDBG funds, city council approves them, it's brought to us, there's a list, and on that list is specifically how much money is recommended to go to abatement of these houses. And you'll also notice when you see that there's a complete list of other projects that come out of the CDBG funds that you might question, why on earth are they on that list? So I urge you, when you get to that point through the budget process, that if this becomes a priority of city council, this is the fund, this is the money that's specifically to be used to do these kinds of things. And I can tell you from experience in sitting through several meetings and several years of this, that there's never been a willpower from city council to address this wholeheartedly and say, we're going to put $5 million towards abatement a year. We're gonna, whatever that number is, I'm just making that up. And so it's always been throwing a dart. Well, we've got 100,000 left in this money. Let's do this property here because we could do it for $100,000 or whatever. But there's never been a concerted effort to do this. And it's my understanding that many of those properties have you have out-of-touch owners that they don't want the property. They'll give it to the city. We can have it, and obviously we have to abate it once we get the property. And I always wondered why that. I get that there's an abatement process, and maybe there's a legal reason for this, is why we don't offer those properties to developers the way that they are. And say to find developers that may be interested in a specific area of town where there's several of these properties, where they may be able to do the abatement process for much less money than the city can or urban renewal can, and go through that process. Again, I don't know, because I'm not in that business. I can't tell you one way or the other, but I always question that. How come that's not a process?
Right.
But I think it would be very advantageous to city council to, as we go through this budget process for 2025, is to have an exhaustive list of the actual properties, so we have an idea, because there's not an area of town that is immune from abatement needs.
Sure.
And this isn't a District 4 problem, this isn't an East Side problem, this is a Pueblo problem.
That's right.
And it needs to be addressed holistically, where the entire community gets preference, and we start working on these issues. So that's all I'm saying. As we go through this budget process, if we're going to make it a priority, let's make it a priority. If not, we'll go through this every year of how come these houses aren't getting taken care of.
To your point, the process for, we applied just like any other applicant for CDBG funds, and I believe it's here in May coming up that the application goes in, so that'll be considered, and I believe they're essentially determined around July timeframe, so we'd be asking for funds again for 2025 to be added. Again, those are home funds, that's federal money coming in, so that's not spending city taxpayer dollars necessarily on the cleanup work. It's certainly still important to make sure that we have the city funds available, just because there are going to be properties that are not in the qualified census tracts that would require our own general fund or capital money in those cases. Again, if we're lucky enough to get this EPA grant, it would be a significant windfall for that demolition program. It would likely involve us standing up a third party to come in and help us with the inspections, with the expediting the process to get the notices and orders filed and get everything processed for regional, helping us with getting designs done where necessary, and ultimately helping us with management of getting these projects executed and finished. In the case of that ask, it could vary. It could be as much as $10 million. So that's a significant contribution if that was to come to pass toward that program. Again, that's a big if, but if it happens, that's a big step forward.
Okay. I have a couple of questions myself, and they're for the legal side of it. And my wonder is, can we change something from the legal standpoint? Because it's very advantageous for someone who has a distressed property to say, oh, here, city, go ahead and take it, especially if it's got abatement problems. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, correct? And the city ends up with a lien on a lot that's maybe $30,000, $10,000. So there's no, like you said, we can't capture anything back on that, but can't we do a different process that goes after their personal property? And why haven't we done it? Or is it possible, is there something we can put together ordinance-wise that helps capture some of these funds back and makes it a more, more punitive process in the end for the person with the blighted property?
So we can take a look at that. Generally speaking, when you have a lien against the property, you're looking to the property first. It may be possible to look at trying to bring some sort of civil suit for a civil judgment. I'd have to take a look at that a little bit more to tell you for sure. But that is not going to speed up the process.
No, but it's going to make it maybe, a little bit to where somebody's more aware of the penalties involved by continuing this behavior of just letting their property go to.
Sure, and you run into a couple of problems. A lot of the people that don't repair their properties some of them don't have the money to do that. So you're looking at getting a judgment against somebody who has no money to pay that judgment. So that's one consideration. There are a lot of times there's insurance companies involved, so that may be part of the delay. I know when I was dealing with this, when I was in the law department before, a lot of the delay was the owner waiting for that insurance money to come in, and we were working with them to try and give them time to get the insurance money so they could handle it on their own before the city stepped in to do it. I don't know if there's a way to try and short circuit that so that the city could try to capture some of those insurance funds. That would, I'd have to look at that some more. My thought is that I think we've looked at that before and there was not a way to do that. And it's going to be at what point the city is interested in taking ownership. So if the, if the city's going to come in and take ownership before the demolition and the property owner's willing to do that, there may be some more options available other than waiting till after the demolition, because then what you're looking at, like you said, is just a vacant lot. And having somebody come in and want to purchase that or do anything with that, obviously it's better for a developer if we're going to clean it up and the lot is ready for them. But that doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to recover any expense from that.
No, we're not.
Yeah.
Because we're
If I
going to
can.
maybe.
If I can, the code, this particular code is different than the way we process code enforcement liens or other liens. So this particular code does give us options to be able to assess the property, the property owner, or both. So there are mechanisms built into the code to allow that. I would say historically that it has typically been, the assessments have been filed against the properties to date. But there are other tools in that belt.
But the only way to assess it against the owner would be to get a judgment. Yeah.
And I think, when we look at these properties, we assume that the owners don't have any money. And I think it's really a small percentage to the actual, because I've seen a lot of these owners just like, and they live in a nice house somewhere, or they have several other properties. And if you could get a judgment, then you're attaching it to all their assets. And so I think it's, in those cases, we should have that option to do that and start showing the community that there are actual consequences, not that we're just going to come in there and clean up their mess. Secondly, when we talk about the CBDG grant funding, I sat in a work session one time where they had a tranche of funds and they had a community committee that sat down and decided where the funds were going to go. And I, at that time, thought, well, we need way more sidewalks than we need that. We need way more infrastructure improvements than we need some of this fluff. And that's where the community committees come in, and they're people off the street that don't really know the entire needs of the city and understand the costs. And, you say it's not local taxpayer money, but it is, because it comes out of people's checks when they're paying their federal taxes. So it is their money. We need to be really cognizant of that when we have those issues come in front of us, and make sure that we ask these community committees to reassess on how they're really going to spend that money and have all the needs been met, like we need to build this fund here rather than, something in the park. The Parks Department has their budget for that, and, we should have things that go towards that than some of the other things we buy. That's the problem with creating a budget. That's where we come in, is we have all these input on where money should be spent, and council's just supposed to sign off on it when they know that there's really more infrastructure needs and needs that the city needs to have in their budget to maintain this city, and less fluff. It's not a sexy job, but somebody's got to do it. And that's how we end up with what we have here, and that's a lack of funding for these properties, and then we're not, if we're only putting liens on, basically, we're not collecting anything on any of this. So either we've got to enforce and go for judgments, otherwise, we're never gonna get anything back. And so I'm hoping that we can look into something that, just to see if we have any options to go after. Because, I don't want to say a name, but I know a big property owner for many years that has had blighted properties here, and he's got a portfolio that's bigger than most, and he's not even from Pueblo, but very well known. And I'm sure that you can capture a lot of his properties rather than him just let the city go ahead and, take care of his mess in the end, because he doesn't do any maintenance. He just lets them dilapidate to the ground. And that's what we need to go after. So, Councilor Flores.
Chuck, were you want, you didn't?
Thank you.
Okay. This is all about money. I mean, if we want to capture and some of these properties and start raising these properties, it would just be a matter of asking contractors to go ahead and put it out to bid. So it's really a money problem here. But the reason the Mandarin got torn down is that responsible owners of property have insurance, and within that insurance, they get debris removal coverage. And guaranteed, he had probably coverage on this building, and that's why it got done. And I've had a pet peeve about the property that we just spent over, how much was it, 800?
Somewhere around 800 or 850.
Yeah, they had no insurance.
Correct.
And so who gets the tab? The citizens of Pueblo are paying for this. It's really disgusting that we now own that property, right?
So it is, we have not yet assessed. We just finished the demolition officially.
But ultimately, they have nothing to go after.
In this particular case, the property owner intends to convey it to the city.
Right. And he's got a separate limited liability company, so we can't go after anybody but the limited liability company that has no assets now.
Just the property. That was the asset.
One idea is that in the event that we were to be able to sell that lot, say for $100,000, we should be able to say that money goes toward abatement in the future and not just back into the general fund. Because it was intended, that would replenish our fund somewhat. And I think that might be an idea of something that we could do for the future. It's not going to solve all the problems, but money like that, if we do sell the property, should go back into the abatement line item, in my opinion.
Understood.
So, anyway, thank you.
Councilor Councilor Martinez?
I have several questions. Andrew, can you clarify, because I know, so Councilor Maestri brought this up, and looking at the budget from 2023, CDBG funds are primarily utilized for community development in low-income neighborhoods, and then it looks like a separate line item for the housing development, housing rehab things. Can you clarify that those are two? So the demolition budget from CBDG is different than the pot of money that's allocated to the community service. Those are two very different pots of money for two very different purposes.
So I'm speaking a little out of turn, but I understand that
we should ask Scott.
Yes, we should ask Scott this question. I don't know if he's still on, but I'll start and he can jump in if he's on. Essentially, there are capital projects funded out of CDBG, and there are services. And so these are funded as capital projects. So when we had $400,000 a year that was going into curb ramp repairs as part of our agreement with DOJ, that the city would put that much money into curb ramps each year. So that's one of the capital projects that gets funded out of CDBG. Another portion of CDBG funds was going toward this demolition project, or this demolition accounts. So each year there was a new CDBG account set up. And so we've been spending down those funds. And like I said, we've gotten down to about $95,000 that are currently sitting in a demolition account right now.
And then separately, the advisory group has a whole separate pot of funds that they can take applications for and advise when it comes to capital improvement in low-income neighborhoods. I don't think that they're funding fluff at all. They're funding essential community infrastructure needs in low-income neighborhoods, so I don't think it's fluff.
Right, I believe you're correct, but Scott would definitely be the one to, Scott or Brian would be able to help answer those questions more specifically about the process of how that's allocated. I know that we submit an application for both the curbs and for the curb ramps and for the demolition projects when those applications are
Right.
due each year.
Right, because the city can also be an applicant as part of this process as well.
Correct.
My second question is, for the homes that are on the vacant property registration list, so it's a little bit tangential.
Yes.
Those are also, they have to be abated before we put a lien on them, and then they're up for bid, correct?
So the vacant property registry is an entirely separate.
Right, but
list,
I'm
right?
just thinking, like, I've passed some of them that should be condemned, but then they're I know that they're also for sale
So
on
if
the
they're-
auction.
Right, and so I'll let
So,
Carla.
so the vacant property register is completely separate from this. But remember, there's a lot of properties around town that look like they are dilapidated or should be condemned, maybe should be demolished, but they have not gone through the abatement of dangerous buildings process. So in order for us to demolish them through the dangerous buildings, they have to go through regional building. Regional building has to be notified. They go out, they do the inspection, and they begin the process. It's only after they complete their process and condemn the building and the property owner has an opportunity to correct the situation, they're giving their due process, that they come to the city to get on our abatement list. So there may be lots of buildings around town that look like they should be demolished, but they're not going to be on the abatement list because the abatement list are only those buildings that have gone through the process of the dangerous building code.
Got it. That helps to clarify.
Yeah.
And with those properties on the vacant registry property list, they could essentially go through that process, but they don't have to be.
In order for us to demolish them.
Right.
They would have to go through that process. But for whatever reason, I'm sure Regional Building doesn't have notice of every single dilapidated
Right.
building in Pueblo. So I suppose there may be I'm sure there's a process to get that in front of Regional Building. But the city is not able to demolish those buildings until they go through the abatement process through the dangerous building code.
Those are my two questions. I appreciate it.
Yes.
All right, Counselor,
And I'm not trying to be nitpicky here, but on the CDBG funds, it is a fair conclusion to say that many of those properties are in low-income neighborhoods. That committee could easily say that we should allocate money to abate this home, and maybe the city will come up with a plan to put a park there, a garden there, or whatever there. It enhances the community when you tear down a burnout, whatever building it would be. Historically, those kinds of projects don't come through that process because they're not special interest driven, okay? The reality is that fund, we buy fire trucks through that fund. We do a lot of different things through that fund. And then we sit here and we gripe because we have burnout buildings and things all over town. But we don't have the willpower to say, we need to spend that money where it's really intended to do, and to really understand that abatement of those buildings in lower income neighborhoods is advantageous to that neighborhood. It clears out the transients that are living in there, they're drug houses, they're just miserable attractions for everybody in that community. So it's something that I think is very important, and I know council has control over that. So council needs to just look at it, is all I'm saying, as we go through that.
Counselor Gomez?
Yeah, I guess it's still stuck in my claw here is, what is the magic number where you say something's a deferred expense on a property? If I understood this right, on average, it's $50,000 to raise a building or a property, which is better than it being erect and, being a flag for a mess. But what's that number? Is it, we get the 35,000, we get the 40,000, and three things I'm going to ask from you guys, if you can help us, that list that you had shown on that, if I can get that. Also, the market talked about there might be hundreds of properties. I don't know how far you all are on that list, or if you've even looked at it. And again, is there a deferred expense property list that we would decide if these buildings are too expensive to do right now or whenever? Is there a start date? Is there an end date? These are the kind of numbers I never get, and I've requested in the past. How do I make sure I get that stuff?
So there's not a fixed dollar amount that says we're going to defer this project. When I got here in 2021, there were probably like 30 homes on, or 30 properties on that list. We've demolished several. We have not gotten through that list yet. So several of them that are on there are still on my list. But again, some of them are done and just not quite cleared off the list either. When we are looking at using funds that are available, that's where this discussion has come up. So we can certainly use CI money in our qualified census tract areas, but we have prioritized the expenditure of the CDBG funds where possible. There's not a deferral criteria per se. If funds are available, we were trying to get them done. Sometimes some of the properties that are on that list are not abatable because of environmental conditions or specific characteristics of that site. I'll go back through that and comb that list and figure out where we are. One of the problems that we've had in the past has been that some of the properties that were on there in 2021 were condemned, let's say, more than 6 years prior to that, to my being here, to even having a chance to try to take action on them. There's I don't know if it's case law necessarily, but there's been a principle that if that condemnation is more than 6 years old, we need to redo the condemnation on that property. So there's a few of those on that list that we just need to restart. But in general, there's not a set criteria that says if it's over $100,000 or under $40,000 or anything like that that would set it up as a deferrable property.
It has to be recondemned?
Going through the condemnation process. So though there's a duly recorded notice and order, that's the notice and order that is filed against the property that says it's now condemned. If it is more than 6 years old, for us to take action on it, there's been and again, I don't know where that principle comes from exactly, but 6 years was the threshold at which we said if it is older than that, we just need to go back through and renotice, go back through this noticing procedure, go back through the due diligence period. Not that we can't do the work, but that we just need to go back through that process again. So there are several on that list that I know are in that condition.
Do we have more or less leverage with a bank-owned property as opposed to a private-owned property?
If that bank is willing to cooperate with us and convey the property, if they, I mean, generally speaking, I would say that they would treat it as a business transaction, but this is speculation. Each case is totally different. Typically, we've got, I don't have very many bank-owned properties. Most of those are privately owned. The circumstances vary from family members who've inherited a home and brothers and sisters can't agree. The estate doesn't agree on how to dispose of the property. Those are challenging situations. Sometimes it's just a property owner that just doesn't have the means to take care of it, or they've moved away. They're just not interested, or there's varying circumstances once these property owners are approached. But each one can be handled differently.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Councilor Hernandez.
Mr. Hayes, I just have more of an observation. You can clarify this or not clarify it. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but in your earlier presentation up here, you had 6 departments city departments that are in a wheelhouse, if you will. And is Public Works yourself kind of the I don't want to use the word ringleader, if you will, I don't know what else to.
Sure, gatekeeper. I would say that in this particular case, when those cases are referred to us, they come to Public
Code
Works.
enforcement, legal, finance.
Right.
Yourself.
With respect to the dangerous buildings code,
Okay.
when those cases get referred to us from regional, they come to Public Works. It's not a code enforcement driven or a law department driven. I mean, any of us can coordinate how to do this, but the actual physical demolition or abatement of the property happens through my department.
So the list of 20, and it was clarified earlier of why that is a list of 20, because it comes from regional. Now you're going to go back and look at that been on the list for several years, 6 years, and refresh it, if you will. I really don't know how to ask the question other than it seems to be you're the one that's the gatekeeper to try to go through all this, and it seems to be insurmountable amount of work just in this area.
So there's always work. In general, it's not just our capacity to handle those as well. Sometimes, it takes regional some time and manpower and resources also. So it's been a minute since I've had a conversation, I guess, about this program with Mr. Guerrero. So I'll bring this back up also and kind of talk to him about, I guess, opening the throttle, so to speak, on making sure that we have the capacity to do the condemnations. That part takes a lot of time and resources away from his inspectors also trying to do other work for developers and builders in the city as well. So I know that that's one of the primary responsibilities his chief building official, I'm getting the term wrong, but chief building inspector essentially is the primary point of contact I have, who I work this demolition program with.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Latino, nothing tonight? Okay. Oh, well, with that being said, we are going to go ahead and adjourn. It is 7:06 p.m. Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Yeah.